All right. So, no time like the present. Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Dave, and we'll be talking about some tips for ransomware defense and ultimate recovery. Even though that hasn't been in the news quite as much lately, that's still happening a lot behind the scenes in the small business community. So, definitely an important conversation to be having. Uh, so we'll just kind of start with a little intro about me. I've been here at Whittlesey for 15 years, and I've got some time in the industry working with small and medium businesses, dealing with the threat of ransomware, cybersecurity, operational IT. So I've seen and heard a lot and helped businesses implement a lot of protection strategies, and that's where a lot of this information comes from. So to cover some of the agenda, what you can expect to hear about, I'm going to give you kind of an overview of anatomy of a hack, so you kind of understand some of the structures and motivations behind why hackers hack, how they do it, and what the typical timeline is. And then we're going to dive into the actual meat of the presentation, some of the now standard security practices for 2024, touching on everything from security awareness training, controlling remote access, different software solutions to provide better control over the network. For instance, application allow listing, managed detection response, and then some recovery options for, if your preventive measures weren't enough, how you can recover after an attack and what you should have in place to guarantee that you can do that. I guess I'll take this as a reminder. Don't hesitate to use the Q&A feature within Zoom to submit some questions. I'm going to try to hold everything to the end just to make sure that I can get through all the content and then address everything as I can there. But feel free if there are any things you think need some clarity or further explanation, throw it up in the Q&A. So first, anatomy of a hack. Why do hackers hack? Well, you probably already know the first one, money. This is typically ransomware gangs and or now more commonly data theft and then the sale of that stolen data. So they're either getting their money directly via payments to recover from ransomware or selling the data outright after the fact on the dark web, or perhaps both. And that's the one we're going to be focusing on today. There's also higher end intellectual property theft, sometimes by nation state actors, and then your general cyber warfare and espionage, which is going to be nation states and their affiliates. But we're not getting into that because that's not a huge impact on the small business community on a day-to-day basis. So in general, the hacking hierarchy really can be broken down into these three categories: the initial access brokers, the ransomware gangs themselves, and then ransomware affiliates. And it's kind of interesting that a somewhat structured economy of sorts has formed around ransomware and data theft. And not necessarily all hacks are perpetrated in this way or through this flow, but it's interesting to see that the hacking ecosystem has matured in a way to specialize to maximize efficiency in production. In a similar way, we would expect the business ecosystem to evolve over time. So it's no longer just a person or two operating in isolation. They operate like their own entities and companies, and have their own specializations, and organizations will pass work back and forth between each other. So we'll start with the initial access brokers and kind of cover what they do. So they do kind of what it sounds like based on that name. They gain access to a network, but they don't explicitly perform malicious activity beyond that. They document the means and type of remote access, and then they set up persistence. So meaning they get into a network and then they set up a way to ensure that they can stay in that network. Typically, then they'll take that access and resell it to ransomware gangs or their affiliates. And a lot of times in a bidding type of structure. So I have administrative access to a server at such and such company of approximately this size. How much are you willing to pay for that? And then the ransomware gangs and affiliates kind of do the mental math to figure out what the likely payday they could get from that type of organization if they're successful in their ransom or data theft, and then a bidding war will ensue. So these initial access brokers, how are they gaining access to environments? What are they doing? Uh, Typically, it's direct exploitation of vulnerable software. So if corporations are hosting a piece of software and it's exposed to the internet and they're not patching it properly, uh, over time vulnerabilities are discovered and published and become known to the hacking community. And if they find those targets on the internet, they can exploit them directly to gain access to a network and gain a foothold. Also, phishing emails with malicious attachments and links, extremely common way for attackers to get into a network, tricking a user into going somewhere or executing something, and then gaining access to that end user's workstation, and that being kind of the initial point of access. Also fairly common is compromised credentials for remote access services like a VPN or remote desktop. Those solutions are designed to provide direct access to a network for legitimate business purposes, but not configured properly. They can also be abused by attackers for malicious purposes. So, here's a screenshot I took from a web search engine called Shodan. Kind of homing in on that initial point of vulnerable software and how attackers can gain access to a network. So attackers can use Shodan and other tools like it that essentially map out the various services that are out hosted and available listening live on the web. So, in my example here, I look for Microsoft Exchange, which is a popular Microsoft-made email server. And I use that one because over the last 2-3 years, that's been a huge source of vulnerabilities, particularly bad ones, that resulted in a lot of companies getting hurt with ransomware because attackers were able to gain access to their networks using those vulnerabilities. So attackers can use these tools to find various pieces of software that may be vulnerable. And it's fairly common for the hacking community to wait for security patches that are released, reverse engineer them to find out what the problem was that was fixed, and then develop an exploit that takes advantage of that problem. So depending on the nature of the vulnerability, how it was disclosed, the process of doing that, from the vendor acknowledging there's a problem to the attacker being able to exploit it, that process can be as quick as a few days to as long as a few weeks, depending on the nature of the exploit and how easy it is to take advantage of. And with say 300,000 Microsoft Exchange servers out there, you can almost guarantee that a pretty large subset of the organizations hosting those services, whether it's Exchange or a camera system or anything else, are probably not going to patch that exploit within a reasonable time period. So, that list of 300,000 targets that those attacking groups have to choose from, that gets whittled down a little bit over time, but there's still just a tremendous amount of opportunity out there for attackers to poke in product networks and try to find a way in. And then, kind of going on to the common phishing email scheme that everybody, for the most part, seems to be aware of today. I chose this example because this came from an actual client, several years ago now, where it was interesting because it was a compromised LinkedIn account was used to initiate conversation with a person at the target client, and then they quickly moved that email conversation over to a regular, or the LinkedIn conversation over to a regular email conversation, ultimately tricking the user to give their credentials away via a fake secure document transfer portal. Ended up logging into their email and waiting until they saw interesting information being sent back and forth between this person, and managed to commit a financial fraud against the company by convincing them to wire money to a vendor that had changed their bank account information. So a good example. You don't see a lot of these LinkedIn ones now, but I think it's a good example of phishing. It evolves and changes over time. So the things that you're familiar with is the common phishing technique today might not be what you see tomorrow or a month or a year from now. And then, those initial access brokers, so now they've gained access to a network. They're not going to perpetrate malicious activity in most cases. They're going to resell that to a ransomware gang. So a ransomware gang is they gain access to networks via purchased remote access or direct exploitation. So, it's not uncommon for ransomware gangs to also be poking and prodding networks throughout the world to see which ones they can get access to, in addition to buying existing access that's already been facilitated. So once that ransomware gang, they've now purchased their remote access. What do they do once they're inside? They've got access to a system and a network. How do they turn that into money? So once they're inside, they've got to do some reconnaissance. They've got to figure out what this organization is, how big it is, where the valuable data lies, what's important to them. Because when they actually execute the payload of the attack and they demand the money, they want to do everything possible to make sure they're likely to get paid, or else their time investment has been wasted from their perspective. So once they do that, they'll spend their between 1 day and a few weeks inside a network to do that reconnaissance, set up the attack, and then they'll execute the attack. So typically data is either stolen or encrypted or both. It has become more common for ransomware gangs to also exfiltrate data as another tool to convince the victim organization to pay them. And at that point, ransom's demanded. Typically many thousands of dollars. Gone are the days of a individual ransomware event on a computer where you can pay $300 in Bitcoin and unlock your computer again. A lot of these ransomware gangs, they're kind of big game hunting, trying to find the company, the municipality, the school system, what have you, that they can get into. And then they know that their systems, their informations are extremely valuable to them, and they can demand a lot of money in ransom. And interesting too that there's been instances too where the ransomware gang has told the victim organization to contact their cyber insurance vendor because they'll pay the ransom for them. So we know you might not have $400,000, but your cyber insurance carrier probably does. So you could get them involved as well. And a lot of times, they'll threaten the reputational damage. Hey, we have your data, we'll release it if you don't pay us. Again, trying to do anything to really incent the victim organization to pay that ransom. They're treating this like a business. They don't want to have wasted their time on spending all this time and effort doing this hacking work. They want to get their payday at the end of the day. In these groups, they regularly tear down and set up new branding when too much attention is gained, which is kind of interesting. The slide's a couple years old. I think all these groups have now since rebranded, broken apart and set up under different names. And in some cases, ransomware groups are quasi-state sponsored. You find a lot of them operating to some degree with a lot of impunity from places like Russia, but that's not necessarily always the case. So we'll kind of go through, I made a simple little network diagram here. What actually happens in the scope of an attack when an attacker gains access to a network. So, we've got a small network here, and, they had a DVR, a camera system exposed out to the internet so that they could view it remotely when they're not present in the office. I chose a camera system because those are kind of chronic offenders of something that gets put in place in an environment and will stay there for a decade or more and never get touched or updated. And it's not uncommon for them to have critical vulnerabilities. So in this scenario, an attacker gets a foothold in this publicly exposed DVR system. They have remote access to the system. They've established persistence so that they can stay in there and get back in there, even if the camera system gets rebooted or the internet goes down. So it gives them some time to operate and kind of start figuring out where they are, what else is on the network. How do I gain access to other systems that might be more valuable? Because that camera system itself is probably going to operate from a position of trust within the network, but it's on the network adjacent to things that may operate with some additional privileges and trust. So they start using it for discovery and recon, seeing what else is available, seeing what other devices on the network might be vulnerable, mapping out the network. And once vulnerable targets are identified, they start moving laterally to other targets. So that's kind of a good example why patching of internal workstations, even stuff that's not exposed to the internet, becomes fairly important as well, because it makes an attacker's job more difficult to move around a network if internal security is also managed well. So the attacker is going to kind of find out what's valuable in this org and what's vulnerable, and try to move between systems, perhaps to a more privileged system, so that they can move along further in their attack chain. So, in this case, they've kind of found a PC that had some security patches that weren't applied, and they've been able to transition their access from the camera system into a PC that was also visible from that device. So now that PC has more information that they can use to do a little bit more reconnaissance. It's a member of the domain and the network. It's got a trusted relationship with some of the servers. So perhaps in this case they utilize the information on the PC and its relationships there to then compromise some credentials, administrative credentials, that proceed to give them access to the server, in this case a domain controller. So once an attacker is able to, over the course of time, leverage their access to move over to a more privileged device like that, at that point, essentially, they've got access to everything that's valuable on the network. So now they've kind of spent the time, they've mapped out the network, they've got the access they need to the different devices, and that's when the attack is perpetrated. So they can set up their ransomware toolkits, and typically have them execute sometime in the middle of the night, so that when you come in the next morning, you find yourself with a note like this sitting in your network share. Hey, your data has been stolen, your data has been encrypted, don't try to do anything, contact us at an email address, we're going to demand payment. If you try to decrypt your data, you might lose it all. And a lot of times these ransomware notes too will refer to a public disclosure of information as an additional threat, to try to, again, incent that victim organization to pay as quickly as possible, so that they can then move on to the next victim. Remember, there's hundreds of thousands of vulnerable networks out there that currently aren't being patched. There's a lot of work to be done from their perspective, and they've got a lot of opportunity to do this. And that's kind of brings us to the ransomware affiliates. Is same general concept as a ransomware gang. They utilize ransomware as a service provided by larger ransomware operators and they provide a cut of the proceeds back to the parent operator. So it creates a super low bar for entry. New operators can set up quickly using remote access brokers and ransomware as a service to then perpetrate the attack, get some quick money, they pay their commission. And there are just so many targets out there. There's an economic incentive for ransomware operators to farm out their tools in this way. So now we've kind of covered the general ecosystem of, all right, how does an attack occur? What happens? We're all scared now. So how do we protect ourselves? Well, we'll start talking about security awareness training a little bit. We've got poll question number 1 we're going to send out to you guys here. So that should pop up momentarily. Do you have security awareness training program in place for your staff? I'll give you just a moment to vote here, and then we'll see the results pop up on the screen. And while we're waiting for that, I've got a question here. Has there been any tie-ins to AI and increases in attacks? Yeah, I mean, in practice, I think the most I've heard about it is helping attackers create believable phishing emails and have believable conversations with their victims once they get a conversation going. A lot of these times, the attackers are not native English speakers, and they're conversing with somebody that's a native English speaker. And one of the triggers that we tell people to look out for is poor punctuation or phrasing within the question, or the statements that you're getting from the person you're corresponding with in email. Using a tool like ChatGPT or something like that, you can use it pretty easily to generate very well-written, believable English text. So that's certainly an avenue. And you could even argue that some of the hacking tools that catalog and collate all these vulnerable servers and things out on the internet could be classified as a type of AI that are helping attackers understand what's out there and what opportunities they have available to them. So poll question number one, or got about 2/3 of people with a security awareness training program in place for your staff. I'm going to go ahead and say 1/3 is a no, because if you don't know, you probably don't have one in place. So, you know, good for 2/3 of you, and the other third, I would definitely recommend it, and we'll talk about why a little bit here. So why do you need security awareness? Employees are the weakest link in the security chain at any organization. You know, you can put a lot of tools in place, and you certainly should, and we're going to talk about some of those. But ultimately, it comes down to a human often making a decision on whether to do something or not, or whether to provide information to somebody or not. In many users, they don't understand. Perhaps they're misinformed on cybersecurity, what is and isn't risky behavior. You know, people are always connected. They've got access to email all the time. They're getting more messages from more platforms than ever before. Oftentimes, it's not just about recognizing a phishing email anymore. As we discussed moments ago, you know, the threats are continually evolving and changing. And, you know, small mistakes for users can result in big consequences for an organization. You know, a user clicking the wrong email and giving away credentials for their email account can potentially result in a, you know, breach investigation and a compromise that ends up costing tens of thousands of dollars to investigate, remediate, and do all the required follow through on it. And ultimately, security in an organization does become everyone's responsibility. It's not just tied into, you know, IT, making sure the tools are up to date. Everybody has to partake, because the users are targets as much as any other system. A lot of statistics on this page. I won't go through them all, but basically covering that most breaches due to human error, phishing email, or some other type of preventable security incident. It wasn't an explicit technical flaw. It required a human to not understand that the risk that they were involved in when they were targeted by an attacker. You know, many times that's coming through phishing, sometimes, you know, voice phishing, or phishing via some other means, a text message or social media. And, you know, phishing has only become more prevalent. I'm sure you've seen the results in your inbox, or you've seen somebody's account has been compromised, and now their account used to get blast out a bunch of phishing emails. It is rampant, and the most rampant type of attack out there today. And really, security awareness training for end users is one of the best ways to help prevent it. You know, what does a good security awareness training program look like? A lot of training. You know, really focused quarterly training is what we recommend, along with regular phishing tests, monthly or bi-monthly. Part of the important thing is to keep it top of mind for users. If you just do a seminar per year, everybody gets scared for a day or a week or a month and behaves a lot better, then ultimately what they end up doing is just kind of forgetting and getting complacent. So you really need something that keeps it top of mind, and they're always thinking, it's like, okay, this could be a phish. What are the risks if I click this link and type in my information? And, you know, ultimately, it's good to have assessment tests in these programs to, you know, understand where user weaknesses are. And you want to cover new hire training for all the new staff. Those are typically extremely risky users because they don't understand policies and procedures yet. Remedial training for people that fail the phishing tests. You know, some people need a little bit more help understanding the risk profile and the role that they have to play in an organization's security. So providing some additional training for the people that need it is important. And then certainly if you have any particularly sensitive classes of employees that have access to sensitive information, or parts of your organization that are subject to specific compliance needs, having training programs to address their specifics as well makes a lot of sense. And important keys to success, you know, leadership starts at the top. If you're a leader in an organization and you don't think employees are looking at you and taking cues on what's important, what's not important, you're wrong. They definitely are. And we've seen more than a few occasions where a leader in the organization says, take me off the security awareness training program. I'm not going to do it. I don't have the time. Uh, and that's always a bad sign for success, because that filters down to the staff of not taking the process seriously. I know everyone here at Whittlesey takes the training, and you will get your account disabled if you do not take the training. And it's important to be that strict and serious about it, because the end users, they are the key to success, and the leadership team that sets the policy is the key to getting them to take it seriously. And just keeping the program updating and continuously improving, changing it so that it stays interesting and fresh. Having a program that has statistics and measurability, so you can see who's failing phishing tests, who's taking the training, who's not taking the training. And make sure the training is updated and relevant. You're not talking about things that were risks 4 or 5 years ago, or you're not giving the same content over and over again, so that it's new and fresh for users and keeps it top of mind. And we have a security awareness training that covers a whole bunch of different things. For the sake of time, I'm just going to gloss over it, but I believe you'll get a copy of this presentation for these specific points if you want to review them further. So next we'll move into the next preventative step: securing remote access to the different systems. So what does that mean? Well, we'll start kind of here with firewalls, the traditional thought of remote access, and we'll go into poll question number 2. Do you have a camera system for your business that you can view from home, or I guess any other location? Go ahead and answer there. We'll see what comes back. And while we're waiting for that to come back, we'll kind of talk about some of these firewall common security issues for remote access. Open ports, that's what I was talking about earlier with those tools like Shodan, where you can find all the services listing on the internet. If you have something open and accessible on your business network from home, the chances are one of those tools has cataloged it and it's sitting in there in a database. Other people know about it. In particular, especially DVRs. Again, that's a very common one that just gets set up and never thought about again, never updated. Remote management for different tools and services being open to the internet. Remote desktop protocol, another remote access tool for end users being exposed directly to the internet, extremely risky. Default passwords not being changed, a simple one that you wouldn't think is that common, but still extremely common. And then VPN services not being configured properly, not having multi-factor authentication, or for instance, not patching your firewalls properly. It's not uncommon at all for firewalls to have exploits within their VPN software that if you don't update your firewalls, it introduces a flaw where attackers could use that flawed VPN service to gain access to the network. So our poll results came back. We've got roughly a third again of people that do have a camera system available that they can view outside of the business. So definitely something I would recommend looking into how that's configured. Done the right way, it can be very safe. Done the wrong way, super risky and a potential point of entry, as we've discussed before. And now getting on to securing Microsoft 365 or Google. So this is kind of the important message about multi-factor authentication that I alluded to earlier. As an IT person that provides advice to people on how to secure their networks, I feel a little bad that now we've been preaching MFA, multi-factor authentication, for the last 3, 4, 5 years, and it's not good enough anymore. Sorry, everybody, you have to do something different. Now there's a means to bypass traditional MFA. That's the one where you get a prompt on your phone, a text message, or you have a 6-digit code that comes up in an app, and then you have to type it into the website. So that can now be bypassed by attackers. And that happens by attackers tricking you, again, via a pretty traditional phishing email, to send you to a fake logon page. And it takes your username and password like you would expect it to, and it sends those details directly to the target service provider, usually Microsoft or Google. But the trick is that there is a attacker sitting in the middle. So they've got a server essentially relaying you to that Office 365 logon page, so they can see all the details as they're in transit: the username, the password, the MFA token that you send over. And when the service provider, Microsoft 365 in this example, sends back, you do your successful authentication. They say, yep, this is Dave. He authenticated properly. I'm going to let him log in. What the service provider does is they send you a session cookie, and you can think of that as like the golden key to access that service provider under that identity. Well, it has to go back through that attacker server. So now the attacker server has that key, and they can take that and reuse it anywhere else at another point in time until it's that session is logged out. So just kind of an example what that looks like. Here's a fake Google sign-in page, and if you look at the URL up there, you notice that is not a Google URL. rproxy.io, it's not a Google property. It is an attacker URL, but it's replaying the Google page to the victim and tricking them into putting their username and password and their MFA code. And once Google responds with their session token, now the attacker goes and takes that, and they've got access to the end user's account. So what is the new thing that we have to do that will protect us from this type of attack? They're called FIDO2 hardware tokens. FIDO stands for Fast Identity Online, and it relies on a physical hardware token that you actually plug into your laptop. So I covered some of the encryption here that at a high level of how it works, and it is phishing resistant and prevents this type of man-in-the-middle attack. I won't go over that here because, to be completely honest, when it comes to encryption, I'm barely at the cusp of understanding how public key, private key encryption works. So it doesn't seem worth it to go into it too deep here. But the long and the short of it is, what does it look like for a logon process for the user? They essentially try to authenticate with a username and password, and then the website will ask them to insert or touch their token. There's a little copper capacitor on there, and that forms as their second factor of authentication. So basically, they cannot log on to the service if they don't have their token, or the online service isn't initiating the logon challenge from the correct website address. So that website address is a key component of how this works that prevents the user from signing on when they're using one of these hardware tokens if they're at a website that's not coming from the expected service provider's address. So that's how it prevents the MFA bypass. So we'll go into another one now is application allow listing, also known as application whitelisting. Now, what is that? That's essentially the opposite of antivirus software, which is block listing. Antivirus software is a list of things that are bad and known bad stuff. We're going to block stuff that we know is bad, whereas allow listing is the opposite. And it kind of takes a zero trust approach. It learns what's normal and expected. Once that's established, that baseline, you lock the systems down, you don't trust anything else, and then you approve new things upon request. So it gets another set of eyes onto new things that are going to operate in an organization. So this is kind of, what a typical, threat request prompt from the software would look like for one of our clients that's trying to request access to new software. Like, hey, you're trying to run something we haven't seen before. You're going to have to submit a request if you want this. And there's some level of inconvenience that goes along with a tool like this, in the sense that users are no longer allowed to just do any darn thing that they want at any time. If they want to run something new that's not previously authorized in the organization, they have to run it by IT and get the blessing of another set of eyes that, yeah, this thing that you're trying to do looks legitimate, or hey, let me take a look at what you're trying to do and actually see if that's legitimate. I guess we've got poll question number 3 here. So if you want to throw up poll question number 3, how often does a malicious message get through your spam filter and end up in your inbox? Choose one of those options, and we'll see what comes back with the results there on that one. And the reason I asked that question is because it kind of goes back to our initial access brokers, how people are gaining access to an environment. So this is a sample email from an actual client, where they got a message from someone that they knew, whose account had been compromised. Say, good morning, take a look at this document, let me know your opinion. And they had our application allow listing solution in place that blocked new software in their organization. So yeah, it looks like pretty much everybody is getting some number of malicious messages back in their inbox. Either multiple times a day, multiple times per week. So yeah, again, exactly as expected, spam and malicious messages being pervasive, regardless of what email or spam solutions that you have in place. So that clearly happened here for this user is they got this message with a malicious attachment in place, and they tried to open it. So here's the request that we got from the end user, and so it's showing me they're trying to run this JavaScript file, which is an executable. It's like, all right, well that's not good. And they typed in their reason here that they're trying to open a document that was sent by somebody they knew. Definitely a legit document. Please let it through. And thank you. And immediately we see that on our end. We know that's definitely not a legitimate request. This user's on the verge of being tricked into doing something bad. And having that tool in place to save the user from themselves, because everybody's busy, everybody's just trying to rifle through things real quick and get their work done. If we hadn't had this tool in place, that probably would have been a ransomware response sometime in the next 2 to 3 days, if that attacker gained access to that workstation. And I mentioned this in the inconvenience that it typically causes sometimes. This is kind of the great story of why it's worth it. It took somebody that saw questionable value of, oh, here's this tool. It's another thing that I have to request access to run software now. When we revealed to her of the near miss of what had happened, the feeling of relief is palpable. We avoided a potential catastrophe on that network. So what's our next tool that's kind of become common and standard in this day and age is managed detection and response. So this is a software package deployed on networks, and it assumes device compromise is going to happen at some point. It's like endpoint detection and response, but managed by somebody that's looking at it 24/7. Endpoint detection and response is kind of like advanced antivirus software almost, behavioral-based antivirus software. It's good, but it just requires a lot of care and feeding, often too much for internal IT departments, or the people tasked with managing these things are typically capable of keeping up with in a reasonable way. That's why managed, depending on a third party that specializes in managing a tool like this, makes a lot of sense, because it's looking for signs of hacker tradecraft and fires off alerts when it sees those. And then you're going to get a security operations center analyst review those alerts and take some intelligent action. It's either, hey, that's a false positive, or no, this is happening at 2 a.m. and this is a really weird thing for this workstation to be doing this time of day. I'm going to take an action, take it offline, kill the process, do something to thwart that attack. And some managed detection response solutions will also protect your Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace accounts and look for suspicious type logons. So if we go back to our compromised camera system example, in an environment where you're running a managed detection and response tool, that attack more or less stops here, or once it traverses onto one of the computers on the network, before the attacker is able to really poke around the network and deliver their payload, because that's going to start firing off alerts and allow somebody to take some preventive action to end that attack before it's able to move wider into the network and hit the attacker's ultimate goal. And then, again, tied into managed detection and response, Microsoft or Google Workspace suspicious logon monitoring. I guess the thought is here, business email compromise being probably, I'd say, easily the most common type of compromise or breach that we regularly see. Would you know if an employee account got compromised and started behaving badly? If a attacker compromised the credentials of one of your employees' accounts and started logging in from strange or unusual behaviors, how quickly would you be able to know that? In most cases, without some type of tool to monitor that activity, you probably won't know until that account starts blasting out phishing emails to all its contacts and makes itself very known that it's been compromised. Catching a bad actor quickly can be the difference between a simple incident report and a full-scale breach investigation. A lot of these credential compromise attacks in Office 365 and other services, the credentials are harvested from a phishing attack or something like that, and then those credentials are tested to validate they're good. Okay, yep, this logon works, and then it's put aside for later. and then a human attacker will come back and go into the account at a later point and do the malicious work of scraping the account for data, or looking for the details of a financial transaction being negotiated. So catching a suspicious login quickly is definitely well worth the capacity to do it, and will save you from a lot of potential cost and time in an email breach. All right, so what happens if you have an incident? Data is compromised, data is lost, servers are taken offline. You want to have a good backup system. Image-based backups being probably the most important part of that backup system. We can throw out poll question number 4 now. Do you have an image-based backup solution in place for your servers? So we'll wait, let that brew out there, and people respond and see what happens when those come back. But really, it's one of the most critical components of any IT security plan is the backup plan. Would your organization survive if the data disappeared? A lot of organizations, surprisingly many, don't have backups or never verify their functionality. I've gone on more than a few network assessments where, oh, show me the backups, and they've got the software and it looks kind of like it's configured to do backups. But when you check it, it's not actually doing backups, or they're just backing up to the same device every day and it just sits there still attached to the server. So we've got here our respondents. A lot of people do have image-based backup solutions. A lot of people probably don't know. I suppose if you're not, operating in the IT space of your company, you wouldn't know that offhand, but definitely a great tool to have. It gives you a ton of flexibility for doing your restores in the event of a worst case scenario. So backup and recovery, common failures that we see in small, medium business backup. People using tape backups. There are still people out there doing it. I think, I don't know, 5-6 years ago is probably the last tape backup that we saw in a client. Its tapes are unreliable. They require rotation. Somebody's got to go swap a tape in and out. USB hard drive on a server or workstation. That's also generally not good practice because it requires somebody to take those drives, move them around, swap them off-site, or it just stays attached to the server, in which case ransomware actors, they're just going to encrypt that USB hard drive as well, and your backups won't be very good either. A network attached storage device can be a little bit better, but still prone to some of those same issues. Ransomware operators have gotten used to looking for the backup systems and also trying to encrypt or delete those because, again, they're looking at it from an efficiency perspective. If they delete the backups, they're more likely to get paid. And really any backup routine that requires daily manual interaction of somebody to do something, change a tape, swap a drive, or anything that isn't audited and reviewed and tested on a regular basis. Those are prone to fail when you need them most. And again, the moderately better options, traditional file-based and folder-based software backup, just an agent that lives on the server or the computer, tells it what to back up and what schedule to use. It typically only protects data and not configuration. And during the restore process, it can take a long time. You noticed I use a few more O's than the traditional spelling of long because depending on your amount of data, that restore can really be long, 3, 4, 5 days that it can take. So those are better than a lot of the things we'll see out there, but still not good enough for most organizations. And then going on to the full image-based hybrid backup and disaster recovery system, takes typically an appliance that sits on site, takes a full image of the servers as they're configured, and restores can be much faster. The data is locally available and significantly cuts down on configuration time if you do have to recover from a ransomware event or even just a hardware failure that destroys your current servers. Best solutions allow you to turn on your servers in the cloud so you can recover from a full site disaster. Say your site floods out or burns down. You can start your systems in the provider's data center. But again, it requires regular daily review and regular configuration reviews to ensure that it's doing what you think it's supposed to be doing. And just as kind of a brief demonstration of what an image-based backup recovery solution looks like, I recorded this demo a few years ago of how long it takes to actually restore from a backup using a fully image-based backup system that integrates with the cloud. And this video is about 30 seconds long, just kind of going through the steps. I put a little timer here so you could just see the process, and fast forwarded where appropriate, so we don't have to sit here for 3.5 minutes. But effectively, you can, from the moment of disaster declaration and the solution being like, all right, we're going to turn these servers on the appliance or in the cloud. Within 4 minutes, you can have those servers starting back up again. And depending on your disaster recovery plan, there's probably a fair amount of work to do after that. But it's just an illustration of the type of flexibility you have with a robust ready solution. And then Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace backup. Throw up poll question number 5 here. Are you protecting email and other data you have stored in Microsoft 365 or G Suite? So we'll wait for that data to come back. Generally, the thought process is data stored in these services is thought to be very well protected by backup, and it is. Microsoft and Google would rate them as very unlikely to lose your data. End users and cyber criminals, much more likely to lose your data. Go figure. So, I mean, most of the times we end up using this to do a restore for clients. It's not because Microsoft messed up. I mean, it's never been because Microsoft messed up. It's because somebody messed up with their account, or an account got deleted before it should have been, or there was an account that was compromised and the data was messed with. So that's why having a backup of these solutions that many people just kind of consider safe, like, oh, Microsoft is protecting your data. The retention periods they build into these by default often don't provide coverage that most businesses need. So we got about 2/3 of the people here using backup solutions for Google Workspace and Microsoft 365, which is definitely good to see as well. And we'll kind of close out here with cybersecurity insurance. This is the fail-safe. Things have gone wrong. You've had an email compromise, a ransomware event. This can help you cover the cost of security incidents, which is downtime or business interruption, investigation costs, notification costs, ransom payments. But it is important. Talk to your agent. Make sure you have the coverage you expect. Find out your limits. Avoid surprises in what won't be covered, because like every other contract or technical document, these are typically not easy to decipher. Those conversations with another human being make sure you're covered with what you think you're covered for. And cybersecurity insurance shouldn't take the place of good security practices. I've had people tell me that they don't want to do this additional security tool or security protection. They've got cyber insurance. And I mean, I guess that's good, but it's the wrong mindset to take. And in fact, carriers are now they're starting to demand good security practices. So, it won't be long before, oh yeah, I don't want to do this thing because I have cyber insurance. Well, if I want to maintain my cyber insurance, now I have to do this thing. So they're actually driving forward a lot of the industry and small business community to do the things that they should be doing to protect their environment, protect their client data. And with that, I'm sorry I went over a little bit, I think, but we're wrapped up. I'll take any questions that people might have now. And it looks like we have somebody asking about a slide deck being available for the presentation. I'm not sure offhand. Perhaps Michael or Margie could step in and answer that one for me. But I've posted my contact information here, so certainly if you have any questions after the fact, feel free to shoot me an email. I do enjoy talking shop and helping people answer some of these tough questions.
Hi, this is Michael. Yes, we're going to be sending a follow-up email, and we can include the slide deck as a PDF. And then we'll also have the presentation available as a video for everyone if anyone wants to rewatch it.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. And then I've got a question here from Joe. On the camera DVR example, does placing that device on a different subnet or different VLAN guarantee protection? So generally, that's considered to be an adequate way of making a camera system viewable from the outside in a safer way. That device itself could still be compromised if it's not properly maintained, and heck, even if it is. The nice thing about having it on a different subnet or VLAN segment is that, in theory, if your firewall is set up the right way, it can't access the rest of your system, servers, valuable data on the network. It can just sit there in its own little bubble, compromised. That presents potentially its own risks. If there's video information on that server that shouldn't be publicly known, or perhaps even just allowing that device to participate in a botnet because it's been compromised. So now it's sitting there, it's segregated off from your network, but it can still participate in other malicious activities that'll originate from your internet connection, possibly consume bandwidth, things of that nature. So it's better, but there's still some risk associated with that. All right, and I don't think I see any other questions. So in that case, I think with that, we'll close it out. Thank you everybody for coming along, and feel free to reach out if you do have anything that comes up after the fact. Appreciate it.